I became sexually active when I was 15. I had a few partners in between there, and then I met my boyfriend that I moved in with when I was 17, and he actually was married at the time, which I'm not proud of either. He ended up getting divorced, but we lived together for a couple years, and then we moved to California. Then we went to Texas. And in Texas is when I got pregnant, and we had been together about 2.5, 3 years maybe, and I found myself pregnant. And I was kind of excited because I thought he loved me, I guess, but I was not met with very much joy. He already had a daughter, and his ex-wife had had an abortion before they got divorced, and he just didn't want to have another child. And so he made it clear that he preferred that I have an abortion, and I was devastated. So I called my mother, and I'm not sure why, because I never really had a good relationship with my mother or my father. And in talking to them, I mean, my mom just expected I was going to have a baby. My dad wanted me to come to New York. So he flew me to New York, and I got off the plane, and we went right to the abortion clinic. I was, still devastated because I had been raised in church, even though not in a Christian home. I knew it was wrong, but I was more worried about losing my boyfriend at the time, And so I, went to this clinic, and it was horrifying, to say the least. I mean, I felt very alone, first of all. My dad dropped me off. There was nobody there to talk to. I don't recall them really telling me what was going to go on. There were other girls that were in the lobby, and they were just kind of acting like, oh, well, if I got pregnant tomorrow, I guess I'd be back here. And I was in there just crying my head off. And I guess I was kind of surprised when I think back now that they would even go through with it being the condition I was in, because I was a mess, I was not in line with what I was doing, and devastated that, my boyfriend would want me to do that too. I went in, they did the procedure, and then when they take you out, I don't feel like I was informed of what it was all going to entail, the procedure or the amount of pain that you wake up with, crying still, and being so alone, no comfort, nobody there to comfort you, just they give you medicine to help you to not, I was thrown up from the anesthesia, and it was just a horrible experience. And you're in pain, and nobody's really telling you what's going on or, anything to expect. So it was, I don't know, to me, it was something I knew I was never going to go through again. There was no mention of it after when my dad picked me up. My boyfriend called me like the next day to tell me not to do it. And of course I said, well, it's already done. After knowing him for 20-some years, I realized that's kind of how he worked, so that he didn't have to be responsible for it, And he knew that I was probably going to be doing that, because that was the whole purpose, I guess. So I don't even remember how long I stayed. My dad never mentioned it. He's now, all these years later, I'm 54 now, and he's 80, and he's never mentioned it to me. And I can say that is the only time in my life that my dad's ever stepped up for me, sadly. I've never actually lived with him. And he's always come to visit, but he's never really been there for me. So, take a couple more years, I'm still with the same boyfriend. I moved to Petoskey. He stayed in Texas, and he came up periodically to visit and got me pregnant again. Obviously, I was not very careful. And, my life was a mess. I lived with my grandparents, and I adored my grandparents, and they, always took good care of me. In fact, they were taking care of my boyfriend as he lived in Texas, too. And he was, at the time, getting another gal pregnant. I'm sorry to say, but this is just to say of what a mess my life was and the choices that I was making in my life, to be with someone that obviously was not, I was not his priority. And I just continued to believe that, when he said he loved me, that he loved me. And I, was a little very naive, I guess. And I'm sorry, I laugh a lot when I'm nervous. So, I did love him. And, I believed him when he told me that he loved me. I got pregnant again, and I went to Planned Parenthood. I, basically went there to find out for sure if I was pregnant. The gal that came in to talk to me to tell me that I was pregnant, basically asked me about my situation, and she just said, your life is a mess. You should not be bringing a child into this world. And, she was going to recommend where to go to get an abortion, because in Petoskey, they didn't do them. I was, of course, devastated again because my life was a mess. And I left there very angry at the lady, carrying a lot of anger and bitterness towards her for a long time. Because it felt personal to me. I realize now that she was doing a job in her, and I guess that's my biggest thing is I feel like people are not being educated of what abortion is, what it does to you for the rest of your life. You still have that ache. They don't tell you when you're going in to have an abortion. They tell you nothing. They don't tell you the scars that you're going to have for the rest of your life of the loss of that child and the hurt and just the anguish that you have, the hole that is in you, because this is part of you, So I didn't have an abortion, needless to say. I had my daughter, and I lived at my grandparents' house, and they took care of me, they took care of her, and which I knew when I left there. I was like, it doesn't matter if he's ever around again. I know that I can love a baby and raise it, and I know that my grandparents can love me and my child anyway, even though I'm making choices that I'm sure they weren't thrilled about. And they did. They adored her. And now she's 32, almost 33. And, I still, every time the birthday of my first child comes around, or not birth, but, you still think about that and what that child would be like. And I have 3 children that are biological, and I actually have a son that my husband now and I adopted. So I ended up marrying the father of my child. After finding out 2 months after she was born, and he wasn't there for the birth, he wasn't there for the pregnancy, and I had to marry him anyway. And it was 2 months after she was born was when I found out that he had gotten another gal in Texas pregnant. And she didn't end up having an abortion either. So anyway, that just to be said that I still married him, just making one wise choice after another, I guess, unwise. So we got married when my daughter was 6 months old, and I just was, desperate, or I just desperate to be loved, I guess. And that's what it felt like to me, was that he loved me. And I have a son that was born, well, he's 2.5 years younger than my daughter. And then I have another daughter that's 4 years younger than my son. So we stayed together, and so we had lived together 4.5 years before we got married, after having my daughter, and then we stayed together another 20 years, and then he divorced me. My fear of, that he would leave me was kind of what drove me to having an abortion in the first place, and I think, deep down, thinking I'm going to always make it work, I'm going to make it so he never leaves me. And ultimately, he left me anyway. And so when I found myself single again, I don't know, I just always had a desire to have more children. And although at the time I was 45 years old when I got remarried, so I wasn't, and my husband had 5 kids. I had 3 kids. And some of the kids weren't all that thrilled about us getting married. So the thought of me being pregnant at that point was probably not a good plan. So we adopted a son from Guatemala, and he is 10 now. Well, I never told anyone about my abortion. My sister knew, my oldest sister. In fact, she even, when I got pregnant again, she said, well, you got to have an abortion, Bob's not even around. And, now she's horrified to think that she ever even, thought that way. But so I never told anybody, and my husband and I never talked about it. And except when we get in a fight, then he would say things to me like, you killed our son, things like that, just to, anything to make me feel like it was my fault, that was only me. And, so I was always beating myself up. And, they used to have commercials on TV about, I can't remember what the commercial was now because I haven't seen it in a long time, but they would show like an empty swinging, That used to always get me. So I basically suffered alone. That's where I start getting teary. I went to a church that I had a pastor that, I don't know what it was about him, but he just was easy to talk to. And I would call him and we'd just talk for hours, and I could go and just talk to him about anything. Well, when I was having struggles, he had me come in and he started kind of counseling me. And so he's the first person that I ever told my traumas to. And I say traumas because, I was sexually abused by my brother when I was a child. I was raped prior to, I don't know, I can never remember if it was prior to getting, I think it was after I had the abortion. I was raped by a coworker because then I moved up north from Texas because I was down there and all these horrible things were happening, and I just wanted to be by my family, by my grandma mostly. So I moved up to Petoskey. So I had never spoken about it, and when I started sharing these things with him, he didn't condemn me. He didn't, because that was my fear, is if anybody knew anything about me, I'll get kicked out of church or something. I don't know. So we played, the happy family, and everybody used to call us Barbie and Ken. We were just, the perfect little family. Outward appearance, So when I started sharing these things with him, he, started encouraging me. And I think the abortion was the hardest thing for me to share. And I think it's because sexual abuse happened to me. Being raped happened to me, but the abortion was something that I did, so that was the hardest thing to share with people. But when I shared with him, and he loved me anyway, and didn't turn me away, that was just huge for me. And I think when I think of all of the things, the thing that always came back was that I hadn't had any healthy men in my life. My grandpa was a great man. He just was there. He wasn't, someone I talked to or anything, but he was a safe man. But this man was someone that was there for me and loved me. Like a father, I guess. To this day, he's more like a father to me than my father has ever been. And that would devastate my dad, but it's reality,